Who needs to have a big week 2 performance in the preseason? All that and more this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, the Dallas Cowboys have their second preseason game on Saturday night, 10 p.m. Eastern time. All of us East Coast dads are just so sad about it. But who are you the most excited to see, and who do you think needs to have a big game here against the Seahawks?
Well, at 10 p.m. start time, I think we're all going to be most excited to see the Sandman, right? At a certain point, because we're going to be...
People got on me last week about me not watching the second half live, but I was like, it's preseason, guys. Like, it's okay. We got to pace ourselves a little bit.
Yeah, and it's pretty late at night on your side of the country.
I was also in Canton, Ohio, so it's okay.
Yeah, so there you got all kinds of excuses there. I think it's maybe another, we kind of talked about this before the show. It's maybe another rung of kind of starters that might be getting into the game, maybe sprinkled. We really don't know. Like, honestly, I think we have an idea that we're not going to see Dak Prescott. We're not going to see CeeDee Lamb. We're not going to see Tony Pollard. We're not going to see, I would imagine, Trayvon Diggs or Stephon Gilmore or Micah Parsons or DeMarcus Lawrence. Like, there's a class of superstars that are definitely not going to be playing in this game. But I do wonder if, much like last week, we saw Ferguson, we saw a couple of starters make it in. Do we see Tyler Biadasz get into the game? Do we see Tyler Smith get into the game? Do we see a couple more of these guys maybe get some opportunities to play? If not, then I think that what we're going to see is a slightly kind of jumbled version of the offensive line that we saw last week, right? I would imagine, we talked about it on yesterday's show, probably like a let's go situation at left tackle. So I'm excited to see kind of some of these young offensive linemen get out there and get more opportunities, because that's where I feel like we still have the most questions. And then some other guys that we'll talk about a little bit later.
I got two names for you. Let's start with a guy that played last week who did not play well, Eric Scott.
Yeah.
Eric Scott is somebody that the Cowboys traded up for. He had a really good offseason. So going into training camp, right? A lot of buzz about him. Had an interception, I believe, in the first training camp practice. Mm-hmm. And then from that point on, it's been relatively quiet. Last week, just did not play well in the preseason game. One of the long runs that Jacksonville had was due to his fault. He was the run fit, overran the play. If he's going to make this roster, he needs to be a heck of a lot better in the next two preseason games, because there's a lot of talent at the bottom of the cornerback room between Jordan Lewis, who we mentioned, Kelvin Joseph is fighting for a role, Nahshon Wright's fighting for a role, and also not only corners, but safeties. Like, we know how much the Cowboys like Wanya Thomas. We know how much they like Marquise Bell. Mm-hmm. Maybe they'll just keep 5 safeties and 5 corners or 4 corners and figure things out later.
Yeah, and then, we already talked about it on yesterday's show a little bit too. The enigma of what to do with Jordan Lewis really factors heavily into Eric Scott's, ability to make this roster. Honestly, like, I'm not shocked in the sense that we do see this happen, pretty regularly, where they have someone who is like the star of OTAs, like the undisputed like champion of shorts and shirts football. And then we get into training camp and they fell off. But I having said that, I was still kind of surprised just how far off Eric Scott fell from the praise that we were getting in OTAs, right? Like, now it's not even just like, oh, I'm not seeing him make plays in practice. I'm seeing the plays being made on him, like I will
say he did have a quote that I saw 2 days ago where he said he was really nervous for the first game, like super anxious, and he just didn't feel right. And he said now that he's kind of gotten that first game out of him, he just feels so much more comfortable. You need to see it on the field this week. Now you're playing a road game.
That would, I mean, I think that would mean more to me if I didn't feel like his training camp practices weren't bad too. You know, like, I mean, he hasn't practiced particularly well. I mean, I guess the problem is that he set his own bar very high, you know, with OTA, you know, and so I think he hasn't quite lived up to what we've heard in OTAs in training camp. So he needs to go out there and put on a good showing, because the OTA, I don't think he's in fear of not wearing a Cowboys uniform in some form or fashion next year. But I think that he is in trouble for potentially making the 53-man roster, because if he hasn't shown us anything in training camp, you know, it's a tough fit to get him on the roster in the first place. There's definitely other guys that have shown us something that the Cowboys might feel more important to kind of hold on to and protect.
The other name for me is Michael Gallup, and we've not confirmed that he's going to play in this game or not, but I do get the feeling that he might, just because the number 1 and number 2 receivers in this team probably aren't going to play in CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks. But I wonder if they just want to see Michael Gallup go out, test his footing, show that he's kind of 100% past that leg injury. And then on top of that, our Wednesday show, Landon, we talked a lot about Jalen Tolbert having this awesome training camp. Do the Cowboys just kind of need to see like Jalen Tolbert and Gallup on the field at the same time, just to make sure that Gallup is still the more reliable receiver?
I mean, I think, I said this, we saw some folks in the comments yesterday on the YouTube channel that I talked to. I think we should be clear, like, wide receiver three is something that Jalen Tolbert should aspire to at this point.
Sure.
You know, like, because he's had a very good camp and he's in striking distance of that conversation, but it's still Michael Gallup's job to lose.
Just getting closer.
A very good camp. Yeah, for sure. But your point still stands, is that I do think it wouldn't be the worst idea for him to be in that group of, you know, pseudo starters that maybe gets in for 5 snaps. You throw him, you give him 2 targets, see how the legs looking. He's looked incredible. Yeah, exactly. He's looked incredible in camp. He looks all the way back, you know, healthy, explosive, springy Michael Gallup again. So I'm not so much concerned about it, but I do think that in the idea of, hey, this is the next step. Like, you know, let's go out and see it for a little bit, get him out of there. Great. Glad to see the Gallup's back. All right, let's see what some of these young wide receivers can do.
Let's talk about who we're excited to see on the offensive line and who we expect to start for the Cowboys on that unit next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and, most importantly, for free. It's so easy to post your job. All you got to do is add your job and then the purple hashtag hiring frame around your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Everydayers, we'll be back on Monday to break down all the preseason news, or the winners and losers, so make sure you tune in for that. But Landon, I want to talk about the offensive line. I don't anticipate that we're going to get Zach Martin in this one, obviously with him just signing the new deal and working his way back in. I don't anticipate that we're going to see Tyron Smith at left tackle, as the Cowboys don't need to see anything from him. But everybody else, I think, has a chance to play in this one.
I think it's certainly worth watching, right? Like, you know, we said like before that I think that superstar level, the veteran level of guys that you have concern about injuries or you just don't want to expose. Yeah, you don't play them, and they're not likely to play. I think there is a level of player that we've talked about that could be eligible on a player by player basis to kind of get a couple snaps there, including obviously Tyler Biotish and Tyler Smith. I wonder if, we might see them just go out there for like a series, right? And
that's what I would like to see. Like, give them one good series, script the first 10 plays or whatever you want to script, and then after them pull them just to get them in the mode of like hitting people with live tackling.
Yeah, and I think the people that fall into that group, I think Ferguson's already on the field at this point because he was played last week. I think Gallup we mentioned. I think Biotish. I think Smith, just because they're the younger, kind of still less established. Though again, we should say Biotish was a Pro Bowler technically last year, right?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. I think that maybe you could see it with some of the veterans on the defensive side as well, maybe. But I think where we're most interested to see is offensive line, just because it's harder to kind of rotate those guys in and out. So if they get in there, they're likely to be there for a series at least.
I also don't mind the idea of Biotish and Tyler Smith getting some reps next to each other, some live reps, just to develop some chemistry, because they've never played a regular season game next to each other. Or I guess that's not true. Well, they haven't, because they played.
They haven't. Yeah,
they played in the playoff game for about not even a quarter before Jason Peters got hurt. It just wouldn't hurt to knock off some of the rust before you get to the regular season, because in week 1 you're going to go against Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams and Kayvon Thibodeau. Like, you better be ready to go.
Every once in a while, I remember that we spent the entire year last year without ever having our true starting 5 offensive linemen ever play on the same field at the same time during a regular season. So let's
in the preseason.
Let's make that happen. Like that's, I'm excited to see that. And you're right. Because of that, we need guys like the Tylers to get some chemistry, right? It's not enough to share the same first name.
What about Terrence Steele? Is he one of the ones that you just wait because of the injury?
Steele's tough, right? Because of the injury. I feel like they've been rotating him in so much with reps against at times that I don't know that they would be afraid to put him out there for a series or so. But I do wonder if they aren't just play the better side of caution there.
Just give him 3 more weeks just to be 100% healthy. Let him do the training camp stuff where there's a little bit less risk.
What happens is that inevitably, like, guys and again, in practice, it was Josh Ball, end up on the ground
all the time.
And then suddenly you've got big guys being pushed around while there's somebody on the ground and someone falls. Their ankle gets turned the wrong way.
Or you're blocking and somebody just rolls right up underneath you, right?
Yeah. Especially when we're talking about preseason games where they're less professional, and so they get on the ground a lot more.
Well, you also have some players that are just reckless in there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That are just physically trying to get a job whatever way they can. Don't put those guys that are injury risk because of their current situations at more risk. I think it makes sense. You could make the argument the other way that you want to see Terrence Steele out there. But I think I wouldn't know who Terrence Steele is. Yeah.
All right. You mentioned some starters on defense. I got to believe like Leighton Vander Esch isn't going to play in this game because he's another like injury risk guy. There's just no sense of him playing. Diggs won't. Gilmore, I'd be pretty shocked if Gilmore played.
I don't think he will. Unless he requests to for some reason, but I don't suppose they are interested in him playing.
No, the one name that I am interested, I know he's going to play because he played a lot last week, is Chauncey Golston. Now, you and I have been a big fan of Chauncey Golston for a while. We've really liked what we saw, especially at the end of the year last year. But I will say it was very interesting in the last preseason game where he started with the first unit, but he was playing late into the fourth quarter. I still think he's going to be on this 53-man roster, but I do wonder, Leighton, like, is he like kind of still fighting for, that 53rd spot on the roster?
I mean, again, I think I've mentioned it. I've started trying to hammer away at my 53-man roster, and it's been a struggle. And I've definitely done everything I can to try to keep him on. But Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen a ton from him this offseason in the training camp, not like a ton of flashes necessarily. I tend to think, and we mentioned this when we talked about this before, I tend to think that the reason he was in at the end of the game is simply a numbers situation, because you're not going to play Hankins for a long time. Mozzie Smith already played a ton of snaps.
And he's got a knee thing going on.
Yeah, and you're not going to play Osa, like it late into the fourth quarter.
Well, Osa played the whole first quarter.
Yeah, so really all you had left eligible to play defensive tackle with Fahoku. Remember, Fahoku was injured. Was him and Isaac Alarcon. So who's basically playing guard on defense. So you basically had to have him out there because you needed defensive tackle. So I'm hoping that that's what that is, and not a commentary about how they feel about him, because I do think he is one of the more dynamic pass rushing defensive tackles you have on this team.
Another player that I want to mention, and we actually mentioned him on yesterday's show, is Dante Fowler. I couldn't believe how many people I saw on Twitter, this would have been Wednesday, saying, "Oh, I forgot Dante Fowler was even still on the team," when he was doing one-on-one reps with Matt Waletzko. It's not that I don't think Fowler is going to make the roster, but I do wonder, is he fighting to be the fifth defensive end or the fourth defensive end? Because you have Micah Parsons, you have DeMarcus Lawrence, Sam Williams looks like he's making a leap here in year 2. You've got Dorrance Armstrong. Is there a chance that he's just a game day inactive early in the season?
No, I really don't think so. He's had a really, really good camp. And if we haven't mentioned it, then let me rectify that right now. I think Fowler's had a very good camp. And I'll go ahead and say this, where I have noticed a major difference in Fowler's game is he, especially in that middle part of training camp, he is one of the guys who is now a disruptor in the run game. I saw multiple reps where he was the disruptive force in the backfield, causing a tackle for loss. So honestly, I think Williams is ready to take a step. He's been on and off the field because of injury and some other stuff. But if you're asking me who's made more plays in training camp, it's Fowler, not Williams. Okay. So I think he's had a good offseason.
I want to talk about another interesting defensive lineman who we just haven't heard a lot about, and a couple other rookies next. All right, Landon, one player that I'm interested to see in this game, because we didn't see him last week, is Junior Fahoku, dealing with a shoulder injury. I did see that he practiced, I believe, on Wednesday. To me, he's a 4th-round pick. It very, very much feels like he needs to have a good preseason game to kind of get back into that conversation about 53-man roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think he probably makes the roster simply because he's a 4th-round pick and they have a lot of interest there.
But does he deserve it?
Yeah, I mean, he needs to go out there and show it, right? Because he deserve, as we know, ain't got nothing to do with it sometimes. And I think draft pick status will likely carry him. And let me be clear, from what I've seen, I'm interested. He's definitely got something, and
he's just been hurt with the shoulder.
Yeah, and he just needs to kind of go out there and show you something that we've seen a little bit of at training camp in this game, and I think he'll be good to go. But for instance, yesterday, he had a rep against I think it was Farniak, and showed this really violent hand movement, was able to, I think it was a cross chop, and was able to get around and around the corner on him. It really, really looked nice. So I definitely, and I think this is the kind of game where a guy like Fahoku really shines, right? Yeah. So I think we need to see something from him, because we haven't seen a ton from him overall, we know that he's likely to make the team. But again, whet our appetite there so that it justifies us a little bit more when we have to cut somebody who has had a really good training camp, but maybe necessarily wasn't drafted as high as Fahoku.
Gonna name another player, Jalen Brooks, who's had, by all accounts, a really good training camp. We've kind of put him on the 53-man roster at least a week or two ago. Didn't think he was fantastic in the preseason game. I just think he's another one of these players that he needs to have a solid performance to kind of solidify his spot in the 53-man roster, because if he struggles, maybe the Cowboys just go light at receiver and just keep 5 and keep an extra defensive back like an Eric Scott or a Nashawn Wright. I just want to see him have a better day.
Yeah, I think from what I heard, he got a little banged up early in that game, and so I think it affected his play throughout the game. He's healed up from whatever it was, or I think it was just like an in-game sort of injury sort of thing. But yes, I totally agree. I mean, this is a guy that had been keeping up a drumbeat with Jalen Tolbert. Obviously the difference is Tolbert playing at a level higher, and also Tolbert continuing that drumbeat and increasing it through the preseason game and then the last 2 days practices. Right. For Brooks, obviously had kind of an up and down preseason game. Didn't have a lot of production. I thought he ran some good routes, was able to get open, maybe didn't get the ball thrown his way, but that's not enough necessarily, right? So we need to see him have a good preseason game, which I think he can, obviously, just based on what we've seen so far, to kind of just cap off what has been a incredible training camp for him. You can't, you don't want to let him kind of fall into the ranks of I don't know why he's always the first one I mention, the John Vea Johnsons and and those guys who, the Raymond. Well, Radaway got hurt, unfortunately. That's the sad part with it. But like the guys that, are lighting it up at training camp, but then can't carry it over to the preseason or regular season. Yeah. I don't think that's the case with Brooks. I think, he showed good stuff, just didn't get the ball thrown his way. And also he did have a drop, I think, in the game, but I still have a lot of belief that he's going to perform in this game, show you what we've been seeing out on the practice field. And then I have him on my 53-man roster as it stands right now. But I also think it's because I think the Cowboys are likely to carry more wide receivers than they probably have in a long time.
I think they're just going to use more than they've ever used before. Last one for me, and this is a total, just because this is a selfish reason. It's Luke Schoonmaker. I want to see him play well because I'm sick and tired of Steeler fans sending me these highlights of Darnell Washington in practice. And I just want Luke. And they say, hey, you guys could have had this guy a whole round before we drafted. I just want Luke Schoonmaker to have like one awesome catch down the middle for like 25 yards that I can send to all my Steeler friends and be like, this is why we drafted a 25-year-old tight end from Michigan, everybody.
Hey, listen, say what you will about Schoonmaker. The reps that I've seen him, he's already the best blocker on the tight end on this team.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
So at the very least, he's going to be immediately useful. So
honestly, that's what I want to see more just in this game. Yeah. I want to see the Cowboys use him more as a blocker because that's probably what his role is going to be this year.
Yeah, and then being the I forgot about you second tight end option who suddenly has a lot of athleticism. You're like, oh man, we shouldn't have forgot about him. So kind of like Ferguson was last year in some ways. Right?
Exactly. So. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Again, every day as we'll be back on Monday to break down all the winners and losers of week 2 of the preseason. So make sure you tune in for that. Check us out on YouTube. We post shows every single day over there. Locked On Cowboys, again, on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Leanin on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Enjoy the game. We'll see you right back here on Monday.